Mobile Pirate Radio. I'm Rob Morris with NPR News That Matters. And we have a special guest in the studio today, Mr. Paul Prine.
Hey, how you doing, Rob? Thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you for taking time out to be with us.
You bet.
Paul was a former chief of police in Mobile, and now he's running for sheriff.
That's
in
right.
Mobile County. Why sheriff, Paul?
Well, listen, I appreciate it. First and foremost, thank you for having me on your program, and I think it's a great program. I've been kind of tracking you loosely when I have a little bit of time on the trail. But listen, I have been a police officer for 30 years and essentially started my career in Chickasaw, Alabama, and went to the Mobile Police Academy in 1997, and of course I was there and worked my way up through the ranks of the police department to ultimately become the chief of police, and that was a pretty great feat. But why I'm running for sheriff, as you know, the city walked me out about 18 months earlier.
Yeah.
And without getting into that, but this is what I've done, and I think most people, Rob, will say that have served time either in the military or certainly in law enforcement, that you feel like it's a calling. And I'm still relatively a young man. I'm not the young buck anymore.
None of us are.
But I will tell you, I have a lot left to give, and I believe in serving people, and I can't tell you why I've always had that sentiment that I'm out here to serve and help people. And it kind of carries over from a kid. A lot of people know my story. I grew up very poor, grew up in Alabama Village in Pritchard.
Me too.
Yeah, that's right.
Me too.
We're an alumni together, and so you will understand this. But in the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 80s at the height of the crack pandemic, there were essentially two types of people that grew up in Pritchard, and I'm talking about young folks. I'm not talking about the working people that were out working. But the young folks on the street, you were either a bully or you got bullied, and I always found myself in the middle taking up for those that got bullied.
Wow.
And so it was natural. It was a natural progression to go into law enforcement, which is essentially helping people. And again, I've got many more years to work, and what better place to do it than the Mobile County Sheriff?
Still feel like you got something to do, huh?
Absolutely.
Well, tell us about your experience in law enforcement now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I appreciate it. I've worked certainly most of my career, 27 years with the Mobile Police Department. It is the big show in town, anywhere from Jacksonville, Alabama to New Orleans up to Montgomery. And so everything that happens in the city affects the surrounding region.
Right.
And so with that experience, I've had criminal investigations, major crime investigations. I've essentially worked more than 10 years in narcotic and vice operations. And then as I worked my way up, I was in major crimes over the assaults and sex crimes unit, which impacts, a lot of people, especially women. And so as I worked my way up through the ranks, the administrative experience and the supervisory experience, I feel like is second to none.
Okay.
To not only the incumbent, but anybody that would be running in the Mobile County Sheriff's race.
Okay.
And but I think it's important too, Rob, to say that when you look at that kind of experience, I have my own podcast at Prime Time for YouTube. And
be sure to check that out, folks.
Yeah. And so when we talk about experience, a lot of what I talk about on the podcast is my experience, my leadership style compared to the incumbent. And I do know that some people take that as maybe a slight or a little bit adversarial, but that's not the intent. The intent is it is my responsibility to show the world how I can do it better than the incumbent, because incumbents are always hard to beat, right?
That's true.
If you think they're doing a good job, you don't really know if they're doing a good job. But I feel like that I certainly have the superior experience to be able to run that operation.
And your qualifications for this is outstanding as being a former chief of police and all your law enforcement experience.
Right.
You also have a degree in something or another, right?
Yeah, so I have an undergraduate degree in business administration, and then I have a graduate degree in criminal justice. Essentially, two of the main disciplines you have to be an executive leader, certainly in government, but that of an executive law enforcement officer. You got to be able to understand the law. You have to be able to understand the reasons of the law, the written law, the spirit of the law. We can talk about that in a little bit. And certainly be able to understand money and how finances is ran. And I believe I have the qualifications to do that.
I get it. Now your philosophy about law enforcement in the Sheriff's Department, what's that like?
Okay, so philosophy, and you just heard me say too, you have what's called the written law. Okay, and for example, and I'll give you a perfect example of how sometimes law enforcement officers, either intentionally or out of ignorance, violate the spirit of the law. And so when we're talking about the law, you essentially have what is written in law. And I'm going to give you one example. You take the example of drinking in public. While that could be a state offense, a misdemeanor offense, that charge itself came out about 35 years ago after the height of the crack pandemic. And it was really designed so officers could keep people moving in the high drug crime areas from loitering in parking lots, drinking, because we know that in those high crime areas, right, and people are loitering, drinking, doing drugs, making drug deals, essentially it's going to lead to some type of crime. Somebody's going to get robbed, somebody's going to get assaulted, somebody's going to get killed, unfortunately, and those things happen. So if you look at drinking in public, that's really what the written law is, but the spirit of that law was what I just told you, and it was to keep people off these drug corners in these high crime areas. And so if you go and if you look at, well, how do you violate the spirit of the law and still be right? Well, if you're drinking in public, let's say that Rob Morris, Mr. Radio Pirate Man, goes to his mailbox and he's drinking a beer. I don't know if you drink or don't. It's neither here nor there. But let's say that you're drinking a beer, you have a glass of wine, you go out to your mailbox after a 10, 11, 12-hour day at work, and you go check the mail, and you're standing in the street. Well, the police pull up. Technically, you're drinking in public.
Is that right?
That's right. Could that officer take you to jail? Absolutely. You're drinking in public. But it violates what we call the spirit of why that law was there. Okay. And if we don't understand that as executive leaders and we do not train our police officers and our deputies the difference between what the spirit of the law, using their discretion, and compared to that of what the written law was intended for, there has to be a philosophy behind that in order to make sure that you are being equitable, fair, and just should you have to arrest somebody for violating the law.
So you're going to teach all the deputies that too, huh?
Yes, and we started doing that with the Mobile Police Department before my untimely departure, and we did change the culture. Incidentally, as the chief of police, I was the first chief that actually put together a strategy plan that reduced crime, but every chief essentially has one. But I was the one that not only put one in writing, but I actually taught it every single year in annual in-service training to ensure that every officer understood the philosophy of where we were going, because how else do you know where you're going unless you have a vehicle, right?
Let me ask something. What about Mardi Gras and drinking on the streets of Mobile and Mardi Gras?
Well, so there are exemptions, right, when it comes to certain things like Mardi Gras festivals, downtown Dolphin Street. There are certain applications or ordinances that would prevent you from going to jail. Now, understand this, in Mardi Gras itself, right, is that you have this 2.5 week window of Mardi Gras, but even if you wanted to arrest someone for drinking in public, there's absolutely no room at Mobile Metro Jail to be able to do that. So there has to be certain allowances and understanding, but if you think about it, it goes hand in hand with Mardi Gras, whether I drink or don't drink, and there are people that partake. And if they're down there in the festivities, short of being completely inebriated, where they become a danger to themselves or to someone else, that's where officers have to understand the spirit of the law.
The spirit of Mardi Gras and the spirit of the law go hand in hand in Mardi Gras.
That's a fact.
Just don't carry any glass containers downtown, folks.
That's right.
That
is a law, and that is. And I think most of the time, now I'm not the chief anymore, but certainly while I was there, that we had a mindset that we would try to give everybody as many warnings as we could, short of having to write a ticket or make a custodial